Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's Caffeine for the Soul. And today we're going to be talking about the balloon of consciousness, which, as you may have guessed, is a metaphor. And it's a metaphor for consciousness as the agent of transformation and change. So when we experience not just a better thinking or better experience, but a shift in our relationship to thinking, a shift in our relationship to experience, that's a shift in our level of consciousness, our level of conscious understanding of what life is and how it works. And I often use the metaphor of an elevator for that. But more recently, I've been playing with a different metaphor. And it's a metaphor of a balloon. And it came from a client session. So I was working with a client, and one of the things on their wish list was they wanted to stay high. And I said, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, I'd like to be able to stay at a higher level of consciousness more of the time. So instead of going between periods of clarity and then periods of lostness and then back to clarity and then back to overwhelm and then back to clarity and then back to being caught up in my thinking, how can I just stay high? And initially I went, well, you can't. Because we have personal consciousness and it just does seem to expand and contract and like a tide ebbing and flowing throughout the day. But then I thought again, and those of you who've read The Inside Out Revolution, I talk about a transformative conversation as being a conversation, a meaningful conversation about the nature of the human experience. And what makes a conversation meaningful is that it makes a difference. It's not philosophical. It's eminently practical. So instead of just going, well, you can't, I thought, let's have a conversation about the nature of consciousness and the nature of consciousness rising and expanding and giving us a clearer view of whatever it is that we're looking at. And it reminded me of something I heard Sid Banks say in a talk once. He said, that's the beauty of these three principles that lead you into this higher state of consciousness. They actually lead you into it. I guarantee if you got 100 people meditating there and 100 people here getting the essence of the principles, the people getting the essence of the principles would win. They'd go high. They'd find newness in their life. That newness spreads everywhere. Once you get it, you're living in a new world, and that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to find a nicer world for your client. And so a metaphor came to my mind, and I drew a picture of a hot air balloon on my flip chart. And I labeled the balloon consciousness and the basket my level. And then I had these kind of weights hanging down like ballast. They were marked TAR, tar. And then I had a sort of a flame that was inflating the balloon. And if you know my drawings, you know that it was kind of hit or miss whether or not she'd know what it was that I drew. But she did. She went, oh, it's a hot air balloon. And I was like, yes. And like any hot air balloon, in order to rise, you need a source of hot air. And the balloon's speed of ascent is always going to be a balance of the force with which the hot air is unleashed into it, counterbalanced by the weight of the ballast hanging off the balloon's basket. Well, when it comes to the balloon of consciousness, the source of expansion is the quiet of mind. It's the beautiful, spacious feeling of silence and stillness. It's that feeling that's available to us the moment we look away from words and begin to notice the page underneath the words. It's underneath and before and beyond your thinking. It's the space within us. The space that, in Sid Banks' words, is pure consciousness, uncontaminated by our personal thinking. And it's just how it works that every time we attend to that space, every time we touch that space, our level rises. Now, the ballast in the metaphor isn't the principle of thought, right? That's just the creative aspect of the energy of life. And it's not our personal thinking, because our personal thinking comes and goes and comes and goes. It's the areas in which thought appears real, what I drew as tar in the drawing. So when a problem or situation looks to us as though our experience of it exists independent of our thinking, we're in the tar pit of experience. And like any good tar pit, the more you try to pull yourself out of it, the more stuck in it you get. The more stuck you get, the heavier everything feels. And metaphorically, it brings you down. And it makes it harder to rise back up. So the example that came to mind when I was talking to my client was a period in my life where I was struggling with a cash flow crunch in my business. And I knew it was just my thinking, but I felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulder. But I didn't really see that I wasn't being weighed down by my financial situation. I was being weighed down by tar, by unrecognized thought appearing real, flowing through my mind, convincing me that cash somehow has the capacity to not only flow and crunch, but bite and kick and punch and just make life miserable. But fortunately, I have coaches, and I was speaking with one of my coaches about it, and I realized that I was making up the crunch. And in the blink of an eye, my whole experience changed. The tar fell away, my balloon began to rise, and as I got quieter, it rose even higher. And within minutes, I could clearly see three things that I just hadn't seen up until that moment. And the first was that my financial situation was just practical. And I kind of knew that I could solve it over time, and there wasn't a lot that I had to do beyond what I knew to do. The second thing I saw was that my experience was made of thought, and not only could, but already had begun to change for the better just because I insightfully saw that it was just made of thought. Not in a, I know it's just my thinking way, but in a, oh, that's thought kind of a way. And then the third thing I saw was that there were a number of things I could be doing to move forward that would prevent me being in that kind of situation in the future. And they were obvious to me once my headspace wasn't filled up with apparently crunching cash. So all the stress and pressure I'd been feeling disappeared within the hour. The situation was resolved within a couple of weeks, and it really opened me up to look for the quiet, to look for the stillness, to look for the space within, to go inside, because that's what makes you go higher. So here's a couple of questions that you can think about. Where in your life are you telling yourself something is just your thinking, but feeling like the weight of the world is on your shoulders? And chances are that's the tar pit of your experience. That's where there are some things that you kind of know they're made of thought, but they really look real. 2, what would it be like to look within for the quiet surrounding your thoughts instead of for better thinking about your problems? What would it be like to look for the space underneath the problem instead of even a better construction of the problem, a better solution for the problem? And if you want one last piece of advice from Sid Banks, and I think we all do, how about this? Always look for the positive. Look for the answer inside. Look within. That's the only place in the world you'll ever find it. Or as Sid reportedly told one of my mentors, I always tell people to look within, but they never do. Have fun, learn heaps, and I'll talk with you soon.